What was it like to audition for this show?
Similar to every other kind of show, you have an agent who submits you. They sort of pick a role that they think is most suited to you, and then the producers agree to see you, and then they give you a date and time, and you just show up, and you've learned what it is that they've requested. For every show it's a little bit different. For this show, I think they wanted us to come in with a little piece from the show and then stuff of our own. So little bits of 3 or 4 different songs of our own. It's always nerve-wracking. What surprised me about auditioning for this show was how quickly they went from the first audition to making casting decisions. That happened in like a week. Normally it's much more spread out than that. And I was lucky enough to get an offer.
I couldn't get an audition because they were sort of seeing people in waves, and I couldn't get seen, and I was like, oh okay, because at the time it was auditioning and it was going to Dublin, and I just got back from working in Ireland, so it wasn't too bad. It was kind of, oh, alright, well I've just been in Ireland for 6 months, so it's fine. But anyway, my agent was like, oh, we can't get you in, oh, we're trying to get you in. Anyway, I'm a best man at my brother's wedding, and I wake up the morning after the wedding, had done the best man speech, everything was just a big emotional drama, and I wake up the next morning and there's a message from my agent, we've got you in. I was like, sorry? Tomorrow? And I was like, what do you mean? I can't, I'm in the middle of Ireland, in the middle of like rural Ireland, in a castle at a wedding with no voice because I'd screamed the whole night before, and I went, I can't make it. So they were like, so that was the Tuesday, I want to be on the Wednesday. Anyway, so they made it so I could come in the Thursday. I came in, I had learned Oz, which is the role that you saw me play today.
You're fabulous.
Oh, bless you. But I had to play I had to sing the Hebrew prayer, and I had to do his opening monologue and a couple of other bits. But anyway, to cut a long story short, it was a lot to learn overnight because it was in different languages, and there's a couple of songs. It was the Meanwhile on Our Plane and all this stuff. So anyway, I auditioned on the Thursday, got told I had a final audition on the Saturday, and then yeah, I got the job. About 3 months later they gave us all phone calls because it was a bit of a long process. But yeah, that was my audition, and it was all just a bit frantic and last minute. But for some reason on the day when I walked in and there was like 40 people behind the table, I just remember thinking, I'm just going to entertain you, and if you don't like it, that's fine. And they seemed to like it, so yeah, it was good fun.
Wow.
But there was a lot of people behind the table, normally a panel's maybe 10 tops, but this was like, they went all around the room and they were all beside around me. I was like, oh God, I don't know where to look. But it was really good fun, and they were so lovely. Americans tend to, when they come over, just be really like, you know, they're really lovely. Not that English casting directors aren't, but it's just that, you know, I don't know, it's just, I've always felt a lot of warmth from American people who come over to audition us, so yeah.
Was the creative team there?
Yeah, so everyone was there. The choreographer, the director, Chris Ashley, our associates, our musical director, casting directors, producers. There's a lot of producers on the show, so there was a lot of those people. The writers were there. So it was like, and I didn't know the show, but I didn't know it that well, so I researched it really quickly, and obviously watched an interview with the writers, David and Irene, and there they were sat in front of me, and I was like, hi, just watched them on YouTube. But they were lovely, they were really sweet, everyone was so nice. It's like the show, it's like they're all really, really lovely to audition for. They didn't make any of it awkward or, you know, it was just a lovely process. It was a very quick one, but it was a lovely process.
Yeah, it was quick. It was a quick audition. I auditioned in the morning, and then I auditioned in the morning. I had a little dance callback, and then they called me within an hour asking me if I wanted to do it. So it was all pretty quick. Yeah, it was a quick day. I actually, when I auditioned, I was not aware that it was covering 5 parts. I was told that it was covering 2 parts. I don't know if that was sneaky to get me in there or if they forgot to tell me. But yeah, I only thought that it was Beverly and Janice. And that was the only material that I had. So I did Me in the Sky and a little bit of Welcome to the Rock. And then I had sides for Beverly and sides for Janice and her flight attendant and Annette. So Beverly and Annette and the flight attendant and Janice. And that's all I had. So I just did all that material, and then when they called to offer it to me, my agent was like, so they actually, those are your 2 primary people, and then you have 3 more people. And I was like, what? I was like, that's a high paid swing.
I auditioned for Come From Away here before they went to La Jolla, and I think I auditioned for Diane, or I may have auditioned for a bunch of different parts, and I wasn't the right fit at that time, so they went and they did La Jolla. I actually moved to Washington, D.C. to start my family, and they were looking for covers in D.C., and I was called by the New York casting director who knew me from I had worked with Chris Ashley, the director, before, and Junkyard Dogs, the producers, on Memphis, the national tour of that. So she said, you know, I know they really want to see you. Can you come in? And that was on a Friday night. I had a 2-month-old baby at home. I just had my son, and they asked me to come in on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock to come and do 4 different characters, all of these speeches, all of these songs, and I said, okay, just tell them I have a newborn, so it might not be as good off book as I want it to be. But that's when I went in, so literally, you know, like 30 hours later. And I was, let's see, I started a new job at Ford's 2 days after that, and they told me that day that I had booked the part to do, and that would have been like 5 months later. So I started with the company in August of 2016, and I was only with them in DC because my son was so young. I didn't want to pursue coming to New York because I had done a Broadway show before, which I had been a standby for also, and it was really difficult just sitting in the dark for 3 months, the time away from your family. My husband wouldn't understand that, but my little kid, I'm not so much. So I wasn't ready to leave DC to do that kind of thing yet. So I said, I'm not going to try to go to New York yet, and if it's meant to be, it'll be. So luckily for me, after they read through the script for the first time in front of me, I thought, oh, you're so dumb. You're just so dumb, because it's going to be a huge hit. It's so special. These people are so special. And I knew I had to make that choice for my family, but I was definitely, you know, it was definitely a tough choice. So I hoped once I had done that, that run in DC, that I just sort of put it out there. I said, well, if you guys ever need me, you know, just give me a call, because I'd be willing to come back to New York, you know, just not right now, but I'll be willing to come back. So you let me know when you need me. And lucky for me, the person who was in my track here on Broadway is from Toronto. And so she wanted to go back to Toronto, and so she was moved to the Toronto company, and I got to come in here. So they called me, this is probably almost a year after I had done the first company in DC. They called me almost a year to the day after that and said, hey, would you be willing to come to New York? And I said, yes.
I'd heard about it, and I knew the music, because obviously it had these pre-existing productions, the original productions. And I knew it was coming over, so I sort of said to my agent, I was like, you have to keep an eye out for this, because it's an amazing show. And I think it's easy to get quite cynical in any business, but once you've worked in a business for a while, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, there aren't many things that really excite you anymore. Well, they're fewer and further between. You know, every job has amazing things about it, and wonderful, beautiful, different things that they bring to you and that you can bring to them. But there's very few projects that now have me sort of chomping at the bit to go, that is what I want to be involved in. That's the show I want to be doing. That's the story I want to be telling. And, you know, almost to the point of saying, I don't care what you offer me. I feel very strongly that I need to be involved in that, and I will do it under any circumstances. So I'd rung my agent and said, you have to make sure that when this comes out that I get seen for it, and she did. And we went through the audition process, and here I am.
Different people reached out to me when Come From Away was being workshopped here in Toronto at Sheridan, and there were a few people that came to me and said, Kaylin, you need to get a hold of this show. As soon as you can see it, or as soon as you can hear it or something, you need to, because there's a part in that show that was like written for you. And so I did. As soon as I heard it, I was like, oh yeah, they're right. There's a part in it that is exactly kind of what I do. And
Which part was that?
Beverly. Yeah, and so I was very excited about it and followed. I never got a chance to see it because I lived in Vancouver. So Vancouver was my home for 17 years. And it's not where I'm from, but that was where I was living at the time. And I never got out here to see it, but I was following it. And I knew the soundtrack, like, you know, completely, and I knew the story, and I knew everything about it. And I actually happened to be in Ontario when they started doing the auditions for the Toronto company, and because I was in Hamilton doing a show at Theatre Aquarius. And so they brought me out for the role of Beverly, and from there it just went, they brought me back a couple of times. Actually, I went to a couple of the callbacks, and they kept seeing me for that role. I sang that song a bunch of times, and then they also were they'd give me, you know, pages of some of the other characters and send me away to go work on that and then bring me back. So I came in like 3 or 4 times for the show. And the day before, so my second last audition, I remember getting a call. I was out with friends because I was only here for the weekend, knowing that I was just in town for the callbacks. And I did get a call from the agency saying that the creative team was wondering if I would consider being a standby. And I said, yes, of course, but does that mean I'm no longer in the running for the part? And they said, no, that's not it. They're still considering you, but they just wanted to know if that's even going to be a possibility. So I said, okay, yes, I want to be involved in the show. So, you know, put my interest out there. And then the next day I got a call that they were still considering me for that part, and they're still looking at me as a standby. So they asked me to come back with all new characters, some of the characters that I hadn't read for before. So I learned all of that stuff and then came back the next morning and did another one more, like, last audition. I think I was the last person they saw in Toronto before they left again for New York. And about a half an hour after I got home, I got the call that they were offering me the role of one of the standbys. So I said yes, and I sold everything I owned in Vancouver, and I moved out to Toronto to join the company, and now I've been here for, you know, it's going on 2 years.
I found out about the auditions almost last minute, and I was flying out of town the next day. So I took my video camera and I recorded a couple songs. One of them I think I even played on my ukulele. I think I did Welcome to the Rock. And I sent that in to the company because I wasn't here to have the audition in person. And then later on, when they had some callbacks, I came back and met with the team. I went back in 5 times. I had 5 auditions for the show.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a long process.
I got called in by the casting director, Stephanie Gorin. She has seen me for other things that I never ended up booking, but she's seen me in the audition room and she thought I'd be right for this. And of course, then she found out I was a Newfoundlander on top of that. So that was a little bit of a bonus. So she saw me in a preliminary audition and then asked me to come back for the final callbacks. I ended up having to fly in. I was doing another job in Regina, Saskatchewan, and I had to fly in for that final callback. And David and Irene were there. And yeah, they were seeing me for the role of Janice specifically, but then they asked me to read for the role of Bonnie and to sing a solo in the show called Me in the Sky. And I think they were looking to see if I had that kind of flexibility to be able to cover multiple roles. And I guess I did something right. Luck on the day, you know, that I delivered a performance that deemed me worthy of being part of this.
Did you get to see the show before audition?
I did. I saw the Broadway company before they went to Broadway. I saw them on December 21st, 2016. I remember this because I still have my ticket stub on my refrigerator. It was their pre-Broadway engagement. There were huge differences in the show than because they were still working out the kinks then. In fact, there were songs that hadn't even been written yet that got put into the show after I saw it. But I came all by myself on that winter night and sat and just cried and cried and cried and cried because I was just so proud. I was so proud. I was so concerned that this could be a send-up of Newfoundland culture because, I mean, the Goofy Newfie, it's a joke that's run across our country for years and years and years. And they very easily could have stuck to stereotypes, you know? But they just, by they, I mean the entire creative team, Chris Ashley, our director, the writers, David and Irene, they hit the nail on the head with what Newfoundland is and really represented us in the most incredible light. And it makes me proud to be a Newfoundlander. It makes me proud to be a Canadian. So seeing the show the very first time was a magical thing for me. And I called my dad right afterwards. And I just said, Dad, I don't care if I ever get to be in this show. I just think everybody needs to see this show. It's amazing. And I'm so glad that now it's internationally being seen and loved and celebrated because it's such an inspiring story.
We started in Dublin, and in Dublin, so on stage there's 6 females and 6 males. And when we were in Dublin, we had 2 females and 2 males off stage to cover those roles. So it was 3 each. But in that scenario, you only have 1 spare person for each part. So, you know, the minute, if someone gets sick and you go on, there's no one else in the building then, you know, who can cover that. So in the West End, in a normal show, normally you'd go 2 covers deep. So you'd have a first cover and a second cover. On this, we have 3 covers. For a couple of the characters, we actually have 4 covers. So we picked up another 2 girls, another 2 boys to be standbys. And between us, we cover them all. So of the 6 girls, I will cover 5 of them. But the likelihood is I won't have to go on for hopefully 2 of them because I'm the 3rd cover. So it's a really that's like SOS emergency. It has to be, I say a lot of people off. It just has to be a particular combination of people has to be off for that to occur. Because also the difference about this show is you can't cut it at all. Most shows, there are ways of cutting a show where someone else will pick up a few lines here or there, or, you know, if there's something that needs to be moved or a prop that needs to be done, another member of the cast can sort of take on that responsibility. And, you know, I've done shows, what was the worst one I did, we had 19 people off in one show. There were 56 in the cast, we had 19 people off. And only 9 offstage covers, swings, those were, to cover those people that were off. So we had a lot of cuts in that show, lots of things that end up not happening, you know, maybe, it's normally quite simple things, like a dance routine that would normally have 10 people in it will have 8 or 6, you know. But this show, you can't cut at all. There has to be 12 people on the stage, there's no way of doing it. Everybody's too busy, the storylines are too intricate, everybody's already playing multiple roles. So each track will play 2, 3, 4 different characters that they'll do with a change of a jacket or a change of a hat. And there's no way to get around that. So we have to have that depth just in case, so that we can always get a show on, no matter what.
What's the difference between standby and understudy?
It's a really good question. It's sort of semantics because there's also a swing. Officially, we're standbys. The main difference between a standby and an understudy is an understudy generally is on stage, so they normally have their own ensemble track, and then they would bump up to play the role if if the person was unavailable for any reason. A standby doesn't have their own track, so would sit in the dressing room, and a standby would cover a principal role as opposed to an ensemble role. A swing is also generally off stage. You can have on stage swings, but generally are off stage. But they would cover the ensemble tracks. Normally, what happens is a standby, you'd only cover one part. So the sort of famous shows for that are the ones that have very, very taxing roles. So, you know, things like in Wicked, your Elphabas and your Glindas have standbys. Anything where there's, you know, it's usually when there's one character who does a lot all the way through. So normally a standby would only cover one. An understudy would cover one or two or three maybe, but would have their own on-stage track. A swing can cover, I mean, I've heard horror stories of swings covering up to like 20 tracks, but it's normally about 8, between 8 and 10, generally I'd say in a big musical. So weirdly, we're standbys, but we're sort of swings at the same time because we're doing multiple things. And also because of the way this show works and because of the way it's created, it's so specific, and the whole thing almost is like a dance, that it, in a lot of ways, it aligns itself more to being a swing in terms of the amount of information that you need to retain for each track. But then equally, because essentially of the 12 characters on stage, they are all principals. They are simultaneously principals and an ensemble. And I think it's one of the only shows I can think of that has that sort of setup. They also need standbys or swings, whatever you want to call them, who are of a calibre that when they go on stage, they can be a principal, they can hold the stage on their own. Swings generally wouldn't have any dialogue, they wouldn't have any, you know, they'd only do choral singing. So yeah, it's sort of all tied up in semantics, but I think it's a testament to this show that everybody does want to be involved, and actually the calibre of people involved reflects that, because I think a lot of people who wouldn't normally sit off stage wanted so desperately to be involved in this that they made an exception.
What is it like to be a standby on this show?
It is. What is it like? It's weird because there's these amazing highs and then these amazing, not, I wouldn't say lows, but it's definitely like this sort of zigzaggy thing, because when you're on, or when you go on for a part for the first time, there's this amazing like, and then you go back to the dressing room and you're like, oh, I sit here now. And the thing is, it's like, because you constantly have to keep everything in your brain. I don't know how it stays in there, because there's so much information in this show. There's so much technical moves and technical, just every chair, every prop, every bit of costume, everything has to be done that specific way, or else you could mess up someone else's track, or you know. So I think the pressure for me comes from not wanting to let any of them down. Because yeah, I can go on, stand in the right place and say the right line, but there's also that element of I always feel it when we come on for the first number, and I'm like, the first time for both characters I've been on for Kevin T and I've been on for Oz, and I stand there and I go, I'm not gonna let any one of you down, because this is something that I've just come into for the day, and I'm not gonna mess it up. So that's my mindset when I come on, but it is a really weird, stressful thing. Some people really deal with that kind of stress, and I began to understand how to cope with it, because it's difficult when you get told in the middle of the show someone's sick, you might have to go on, and you've never done it before, and because you've not thought about it, you're just suddenly having to go, oh right, I haven't looked at him in a week or a month, I need to get my notes out. And I remember it was Nathaniel who plays Bob. He was feeling dizzy, and the first cover was on holiday, and I just remember thinking, if it had been the start of the show, I would have gone on and nothing would have happened. It would have been fine. It would have been the show. But because Nathaniel is black and I'm white, I thought if I go on mid-show in the same costume, it's gonna like, oh. Thankfully, he didn't go off. It was just he wasn't feeling great, but he managed to power through. He was wonderful as always. But it was just one of those moments where I was like, that was so scary. That 20 minutes where I thought I might have to actually do this. But it was, that is just the job. And it is exciting and terrifying. But it's great. It's so much fun. I actually really been surprised at how much I've enjoyed playing different parts. Because I think when you play the one part every night, not that you become stale, but you have to find new stuff with it. You have to constantly keep it fresh and alive, and that is a really hard thing for an actor, any actor, to keep it like that. But standbys don't ever really have that luxury because it's always right there on our tip of our tongue. We just have to get it out,
I was a standby for my first year. So in that first year, I didn't go on a lot. I think I went on maybe 50 times total. And it was always for different tracks. So there was no, how do you keep it fresh? For me, because it was always fresh. It was always like being shot out of a cannon when you're asked to go on. If you haven't been on for 3 weeks and all of a sudden you're in,
Sometimes, like this week, I knew that someone was out, that Astrid was out. So I knew a couple weeks in advance that was going to happen. So I've known about that for a long time. I have been called in the middle of the show from upstairs to come down and get into costume during costume party to then start the show for somebody after that. So sometimes you have a lot of notice and sometimes you have no notice. The show's already started. And I've been called at 4:30 in the afternoon for an 8 o'clock show to go on for a secondary character, that's a little scary because those are the ones you know them intellectually, but you don't physically do them as often. So we say it's like your body doesn't have as much memory of it. So you can't trust yourself as much as with Beulah and with Diane. I've gotten to do them enough that I sort of know where they live. And not to say I never make a mistake, but I can trust myself enough that if the mistake is there, it's very small. Whereas the secondaries, you have to think the whole time. So we call it clenching. When you're you gotta clench because you're I know this, but you have to think every second while you're out there, as well as not ever let the audience know that you're thinking so much about what's next.
The boys have gone on mid-show. That has happened to them. And the other thing that's happened to us is it's been very close to show time. Somebody's come in, they start getting ready, they realize, no, I don't think I have it in me to do this right now, and it's 15 minutes to showtime, and they say, all right, understudy's on, you're done, yeah, quick get into costume and wig, that kind of thing. I've also had an experience where there was someone not feeling well on stage, so they got me into full costume and wig, just in case that person needed to step out in the middle of the show. That way the delay would be a lot less than would they have to stop the show and then get me fully ready in order to continue. So that was another exciting one. Just sitting backstage going, am I going to just go on in the next scene or what? So it's never a dull moment.
Sometimes you'll be on multiple times a week for a week straight. Sometimes you won't do anything. I had a portion of time last fall where I didn't do anything for about 2 months. So where it was just, coming to work, because we are at every single show. So we're here 8 times a week, just like the rest of the company. And so that the waiting can be difficult, but when you do get to go on, it's really fun. But there's no guarantees. There's no guaranteed amount of shows you're going to do. You don't know when. You could get the call. I've gone on in as little as 15 minutes notice, but I also have had months notice of when I'm going on, because if people book vacation time, then months out that's when I'm going on for a full week when that person's away on vacation or whatever. But other times you just get the call during the day that someone's sick or there's an injury or a family emergency or something that takes place, and so then you're on. And you sometimes could do one show, one off in a week, and other times, maybe somebody has the flu or something, and so you're on for 3 times in a week. But there's it's all different. All 6 of us, it's all a different amount. And
You just don't know. It's a mystery every week if you're going to get on or not.
Crazy different skill set, you know, and I think any swing, any standby, any understudy who can have that information in their brain, not do it every day, and go on and make it work. I think it's something that not a lot of people can do, but it's a lot harder than people think. I think, you know, it's definitely. Yeah, I struggled for a long time with this show. If I've ever understudied before, it's only ever been one role, and that's fine. Anyone can learn one role, but to learn 5 and they all do slightly the same but slightly different things, you're like, whoa, you know. But yeah, it's a tricky thing.
It's a day-to-day battle, truly. There are days that I come in and I'm going on and I'm ready. I just feel good and I'm ready to go. And there's days where I'm going on for that exact same track that I felt calm about 2 weeks ago, and I'll just feel like, oh, you know, just nervous. And that's fair. Like, I've done shows where I've been in the performing company, where I've done every single show, and still there would be shows, I don't know, you know, somebody's in the audience, or you're just kind of feeling like you might be having an off day, and nerves come back, and they come in ebbs and flows. But it's just when it gets to that point that, like you said, like an anxiety happens and you're not quite sure if you can do this right now, it's all about what's the next thing. What's the next, just do the next thing. Don't, once again, look at it in pieces like we were talking earlier, not as the whole mountain of the show, but just what comes next? What comes next? What comes next? Okay, I did that. What comes next? And that's always how I felt I deal with it best. And then the other thing is just to breathe and trust the other people on that stage with you to get you through, because they're all there supporting you the whole way.
My life is devoted to the show. I get up early every morning and I study my 4 roles and make sure they're in here, because they can call on me at a moment's notice. I've had less than half an hour's notice that I'm going on, and so I need to be ready. And because I'm new, I have to really make sure that I know the roles. So yeah, I study, I come to the show, and usually during the show I will keep studying, and I go to bed and I repeat. I've had the privilege of going on a few times now. I remember it being very exciting and a whirlwind and a bit scary. And I also remember the cast being very, very generous to me. I've joined the cast a little late. They've all been doing this show over 500 times now. So they're like a family. And when I'm on stage, it's quite magical. Everybody makes eye contact. Sometimes they'll even whisper to you, "You're doing great," or give you lots of encouragement. And that's been a real gift.
As the newest member of the company, like, how did you learn it? Did they have rehearsals with everyone else, or?
It was mostly me in a room with the resident director, Dana T-Catch, the music director, Bob Foster, and there were some associates who helped out as well, and a stage manager. And it was just the 3 or 4 of us in a room for months, going through the show and learning it, and everybody reading everybody else's parts to try and support me. And a couple days a week we would come into the theater and I would have a chance to be on the stage, and the other standbys would also jump in and say everybody's lines. It was pretty amazing. Yeah.
And how long does it take to learn each track?
For me to learn all 4, I started in February of this year, 2019, and I just finished learning them last week, and we're now in June.
Wow.
So a few months. And in that time, I've also been on in the show. So at the same time as learning the show, I've been performing in the show. There are little pieces of tape all over the stage, and they're all different colors, and they have different numbers on them. And that's how we know where to put things like chairs and tables, and even sometimes our own bodies, to be very, very precise in where the placement of things are. So part of learning the role is, yes, singing and learning the lines, but it's also learning where everything goes very, very quickly.
We were lucky to have everything mapped out for us on day 1 of rehearsal. In the rehearsal studio, we had the turntable and all the spike marks were laid down, so it was really just remembering what spikes mean what, what chair is what number, and these things had to be committed to memory. And at first, once again, it felt like a mountain. It's like, I can't remember 230 spike marks. How does anybody do that? But then once you start, it's almost like as you add on, it gets easier because you remember, it's like, oh right, in this roll, I moved this chair here to a red spike. Well, I'm looking for a red spike in this roll as well, but it's this chair. So it got easier as time went on because you start to have an understanding of the way everything works, but at very first glance, it seems insurmountable. How does anybody remember? But there is a method behind the madness, and once you kind of get that method, it becomes a lot more palatable to deal with.
How many different colors are there?
Oh my goodness. There's what? Purple, pink, red, green, brown, yellow. There's, I think 6 or 7. I'm probably forgetting a color at this point in time. There's like certain X's on the stage as well that are just specific for just that specific scene. It's only used for that, and that's where the table goes, kind of thing. There's a lot of different colors. The hard ones to see are the brown ones, though. They're too close to the color of the stage. You're just, where did that brown spike go?
Can you tell me about the props exchanges?
Prop exchanges. You know, it's another thing that as a standby, you basically can't rehearse that until you're on with the people who are going to be passing you the props, right? So you need to be aware and know that you're probably going to grab it in a different way than the person who usually does. And to be conscious that maybe the person you're passing something to isn't used to receiving it in the way that you may have given it to them. And that's something that you can only learn by asking your fellow actors, like, how was that handoff? How was this? Because it's not really something you're privy to by watching, which is a lot of how we learned as standbys. It's a ballet, a choreographed ballet, and you really need to work as a team to make sure it all works, everything gets to where it needs to be when it needs to be there. Just knowing the inner workings of it and trying to support each other in all those pass-offs and the quick hidden little slips of the hand. It's a really clever show in that way.
It happens so fast.
It's crazy. I always say to people who are like, I don't understand where that came from or what, you need to see it at least 6 times before you actually start catching all of the little nuances and how much we all help each other out on that stage in order to make the show actually be the magic it is. It's a lot of teamwork.
Tell me about the choreography for this show.
Do you say the chairography? Yeah. Chairography. I have nightmares about chairs now. It's very specific. No, it's great, and actually, it's almost, I think, more difficult for the onstage cast who only do their own track. So the track would be that a track is a performer's journey from start to finish of a show, because they know their own chairs, they know what they do and their own chairs, and that's it. And the more you learn, actually, the easier that it becomes to learn, because you start to see it as a jigsaw that goes together. So we have 14 chairs in the show, and that's pretty much the set. There's 3 tables, and that's it. And everything is created using these chairs. So they'll get changed into an aeroplane or a bus or a bar or an aeroplane in a different layout, you know, a jumbo as opposed to a smaller aeroplane, or 2 different buses that are riding next to each other, and all the transitions happen in sort of 8 beats of music generally. There's a lot of running around, and often people are having to change their costume as they're doing it, or pass someone else's costume onto them. There's a lot of sort of prop exchanges that happen, and what they've achieved with such simplicity, it's so complicated to do, and it's actually frustrating when you watch it. It looks so effortless, and that's an absolute testament to the creation of the piece and the performers who do it, that it looks really easy. but it's so complicated. But what I love about it is it really takes us back to, I think, how storytelling used to happen. The simplicity of what do we actually need to tell a story, and the answer is actually very little. You know, stories historically told around fires, you know, told around sitting around in the living room. And if you can rely on the audience's imagination to fill in those voids, and if you set it up early enough in the piece that that's what's expected of them, I think they're more than willing to go on that journey with you. And then I think actually what happens is they really focus and zone in on the humanity of the story that's being told, because all the other things don't matter that much. You know, I mean, there's a place for big musicals with big sets. You know, they're wonderful and vibrant and serve a very different purpose. But there's something that I really love about the simplicity of this, and how it all gets drawn back to the bare bones of what is the important thing in storytelling, which is the heart and the truth and the rawness of human experience, which we do on a chair.
We have an archive video of the show, so we just so I can go back and look at it at any point and go, okay, what chair does he move out? Is it 1 or is it 2? Is it 3? It's 4. And he moves that. And I find it hard because the chairs are all numbered, but I have different names of the chairs. So I have granny chair, floral chair, old chair, white chair. I have black chair. I have those chairs. For me, that's how I identify them. But when someone says chair 4, I go, oh. Okay, but I really should assign them, but some of my other standbys are amazing at the chair, knowing which one's which, but it's weird when you're in the moment and there's 12 people on stage and they all move a chair. Well, I guess I'm moving this one then. So it's and what's crazy is everything is marked out on the stage.
Yeah, I saw the spikes.
So you know where the chair is, but there's also arrows on the spikes, which I can't really see the arrows. I can see the numbers and that's fine, but I didn't see the arrows. So one time when I went on for Kevin's Tea, the first couple of nights, I set Diane's chair for phoning home, but I set it the other way around. So instead of it being that way, it was that way. And I bless her, bless Helen Hobson, she made it work in whatever way she did, because it wasn't a million miles off. So she managed to get into your light and sort of find the thing. But it's one of those things that I didn't even see the arrow. I just saw the mark. I went, that's where it's got to be. But obviously no. If you've got a mark, it could go that way or that way. So you need to look for the arrow. So yeah. But I think once you know one part, and then you learn a second part, everything else after the second track you learn, everything else kind of, because you always interact with these people, you always see them doing something. So it is weird, but it makes sense when you're in it, not from the outside. Because when we started to learn the first track, I was like, I can't do this, But I think everyone learning this show for the first time it's a trial. It's definitely something else.
How do you manage to memorize so much information?
I'm gonna tell you, I didn't think I was gonna be able to. I thought, like, probably for the first month and a half that we were rehearsing, I was like, I'm gonna lose my job. There's just no way I can get this done. I don't think I can get it into my head. Since having tackled the mountain, I now see that any of the standbys or whatnot on Broadway who reached out or who came and joined our company as well said, you know what, you're going to feel like this, but you'll get there. Everybody feels this way. Everybody cries. But everybody gets through and gets to the other side. And it's been really wonderful to watch and support and help our new standbys who have come on board in the Canadian company, but also to reach out to standbys from other companies, from the tour, from the UK, from Australia, and just be like, hey, I know what you're going through. It's gonna be okay. It doesn't feel like it right now. I know it doesn't feel like it right now. You're gonna have these days, but you're gonna make it through. And to have the perspective I have now, being on this side of it, I'm so grateful for the experience. I never want to have to do it again. But it's definitely something I'm the most proud of myself for achieving in my entire career, because it is an incredible feat. But like I said, so rewarding to know, and just to prove to yourself that you can do it. You know, I think it's why people run marathons and climb Mount Everest and stuff. And even when they like, if people say you can't do it, or if you even think you can't do it, to actually conquer that, there's no bigger high, right?
Stanley in UK told me that she had nightmares about chairs for a while.
I'm sure she did. I think we all did. Or just the nightmare that you're sitting in the wrong chair and somebody comes over and looks at you like, you're not supposed to be here. There are all of those things. All of those things. Yeah, it's a brilliant show, but it's deceivingly complex. Like it looks like 12 chairs and 3 tables and 12 people on a stage, but it's so much more, and that's the magic of it, right? It's that it looks seamless. It looks easy. When you get into the nitty-gritty of learning it, though, it's hard.
This is the hardest show I've ever done. It was the hardest show I've ever had to learn, and I've done a lot of shows, but like this is the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. It's just brain-wise, it's like I've compared it to the idea of having to be like a swing in the Rockettes Christmas show, because it's like with all the chairs and with all the intricacies of the traffic, and then you're layering on the coats and the hats and there's so many different little layers to it that each track almost becomes kind of mathematical when you're compartmentalizing it in your mind. And so covering something like Alphaba is like you just learn the role, you find out who she is for you as an actor, and then like, you know, you go on and you get to like own the show, and it's amazing. And I played Alphaba like well over 100 times, and it just, you know, that role is like a part of me. Like it was just, they say that I'm on and I'd be like, great, and I just pop in. But this is a little different. I feel that way with Beverly now, because I've done Beverly so much that I feel like it's very much mine now and I own it. But when you're in a show like this and you're covering like these really full, rich roles that are so complex, and each track is like that, it gets a little tricky if you haven't done it in months. And if you're, you know, when you're doing something over and over again, it gets like second nature, and you really can own it. But when it's not happening that way, and you're diving in every once in a while, it can really mess with you. It's hard. It's really hard to maintain it and keep it in your brain super tight to where you can go and nail it, you know. So it's hard. Way harder than Wicked.
The hardest part of doing the show is that you're not just playing one character. You're playing many characters, so you have to switch from one to the other. And then what makes it even more difficult is that they're all from different places in the world. So one line you're talking like you're a Ganderite, and then literally 5 seconds later you could be speaking like you're from Texas or California or Britain, you know, and then back and forth and back and forth. So that was really, really hard to get into everybody's bodies and into your minds, you know. The other thing that makes it really challenging is that it moves really fast. This show, a lot of musicals have like a longish scene, you know, like a 3-4 minute long scene that ends with a song. And then the next scene begins, and then that ends with another song, right? That's kind of the structure for musicals. Well, not this one, right? So this one is kind of like, it's almost like a movie, like they just, you know, smash cut you from one scene to the next. And you could be in that scene for 20 seconds, and then boom into the next, and then boom into the next. So, and there's music all the way throughout. So yeah, it was far more technically challenging than any other show I had done.
Because it's an hour and 40 minutes straight through with no interval, and normally you'd at least get a chance to gather your thoughts in the interval. It's challenging as a performer, simply for purely logistical reasons, like if you need to take a bathroom break, that's not going to happen, so you better make sure you've been to the bathroom before the show starts and things like that. But actually, it's it brings another layer, I think, because the energy, there's no chance for any of the energy to drop or change. It just keeps building and building. And I know that one of the reasons that they decided to not have an interval for this show was because the people of Gander and Gambo and Lewisport and all the other towns that all took in these come from aways, they didn't get a break. The planes landed, the people came off the planes, they needed feeding, they needed housing, they needed to be taken care of emotionally as well as logistically, and none of them slept. So I think the idea was that the performers and the audience had a little taste of that, of what that might be like, what that might feel like to not get a break and not get a mental break at any point. So off the back of that, the scenes move very, very quickly. There's no dead time. The scenes are all quite short as well, so the pace is just snappy all the way through.
I cover both the Kevins, but Kevin T, I struggle to learn. I don't know why. I think it was because it was the second one I learned. And there was a moment, there's a couple of moments for him where because he's very exposed. He's very always direct addressing the audience. But there was a moment where he's the bus driver, but he has to turn the bus on certain kinds of music. And when I'm watching it, I'm like, yeah, it's easy, it's fine. But you have to follow the conductor. And following the conductor whilst trying to deliver a monologue, I find that so... Well, I find it really difficult. So I'd say that to me personally was the hardest one to learn, because it was a lot of that going on, a lot of technical... I'm driving a bus, but I'm looking at the conductor while I'm saying words, and I was like, meh. And it's the same, Oz has the same, because he has to turn his steering wheel on certain words, and as does Hannah. So it is very, it's one, though anything with a bus, for me, is hard.
It was, I have to say, it's been the most challenging thing I've ever done in my career. And I've had a really great career. I've played a lot of really big roles, really challenging roles. I've been blessed. And I've done roles that have been very scary and very hard to learn, but nothing compares to being a standby and come from away. It is the hardest thing I've ever done. I always tell people, no word of a lie, for about the first month of rehearsals, I pretty much cried every moment I was alone because it was so stressful. But now, all of this time later and having all 4 roles under my belt, and, we all are, all of us standbys go on often. So it feels like that was a world away, that fear and that stress that it took to learn the roles seems like it was so long ago, but it really was difficult. And because I've never been a standby before, I didn't really know what the process would be like. So it was actually, the process for me changed. It's sometimes on a daily basis when we were in rehearsals, because I wasn't exactly sure the best approach to it. And then I did find a process that worked for me, and it was, I had 2 different scripts going, and each script was 2 different characters. So I'd have one script that was just dedicated to Beverly and Diane's tract, and then one script that was just dedicated to Beulah and Janice. And I would divide the pages and have arrows and numbers. I have, this crazy number system, and because everything is numbers in the show, that's how we know where our spots are. It's all color coded and numbered. So I would have those scripts, and that's how I learned it originally, and then transferred all of those to cue cards that are literally just, it's almost like hieroglyphics. Like no one else, maybe some of the understudies would understand if they looked at mine, because I think we each have a different process. But it basically, my cue cards are, like titles of the parts of the show or the songs of the show, and then it's just numbers and arrows and colors, and I know what that means. So if I need to glance at them, or say if I haven't been on for a role in a really long time, I will you know, just that night before going on, I would glance at them. Or I have 2 sets of them. I have one set at the theater and one set at home. So if I'm, you know, riding the subway in that night, I might have my cue cards with me and reading them on the train just to make sure, to refresh. I'm like, oh yeah, that's when I do that. Or, you know, there's different movement sequences that obviously, you know, that all the characters do. And so I have those little kind of cheat words, and I know what that means. If I have, you know, up first written down, or first group, second group, I know what that means for that character. So the whole thing with learning all 4 parts was just a learning process in itself. Not just the learning of the 4 parts, but the learning how to learn the 4 parts was also an interesting part of the process. And for me, I actually sing all 4 harmonies in the show, because each one of my characters is on a different harmony line, and that has been very demanding. And my score is completely color coded, so each role has a different color, and if you look at that score, it just looks like a rainbow of colors. But you know, that's how I learned the system there, and that's a really difficult part of being a standby, is the harmony lines. I mean, it's all difficult, but having to learn all 4 harmonies was a little bit mind-blowing for me.
Let's talk about harmonies.
Let's. Yeah. Oh, that's another skill. You know, it's just another skill that Sheridan gave me great background in, but to have to learn all of them and then compartmentalize them into like, oh no, when I'm this character, when I'm at this side of the stage, I sing this harmony. It's that kind of thing. And I have to be honest, don't tell Bob Foster, but we all mess up sometimes. and you're still singing something that's in the chord and sounds great. The audience isn't going to know, but then you suddenly realize, oh, I'm supposed to be on the alto line, not the soprano line. It's just, you're thinking about a million things, and sometimes that's not the first thing you're thinking about. So it's always a struggle to remind yourself that in this part you sing this, in this part you sing this, and it was a process of layering the harmonies on top of one another or underneath each other, depending on how you decided to learn them. But I've had to do this for another show that I've swung in the past, and it's one of the hardest things to do, but also kind of the funnest, because you get to really hear how the music is composed. Because if you're just playing one character, you're just going to learn that harmony line. I mean, unless you're a real go-getter and you just think, yeah, for fun, I'm going to learn the other harmonies. But to really see how brilliantly the music is crafted and put together, because what you hear obviously is incredible, but to really get into the nitty-gritty and be like, oh, this is just so smart. There's only one person singing this, but just to hear that little nuance there really fills out the sound. And so it's really challenging, but really musically fulfilling as well to learn all of the parts, at least all the female parts. I haven't delved into the men's yet.
It was very important for me to do it just like, to really compartmentalize. Like the way that I work is I have to like compartmentalize each track in my brain. Like I have to be able to be like, beep, 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 okay, now put you aside, now this, get that. Like that's how I work. Everybody works differently. But like I really needed to master one track, have it all in there, have it all locked in before I could move on to the next one. And I could really tell the couple roles that I didn't really quite finish with, like both Beulah and Bonnie, I never properly learned the end of the show on stage. Like we just would like run out of time, and then I had to switch and be someone else or whatever. But both of those tracks, like I never really finished the blocking on stage, finished it like mathematically in my head, finishing the track. And I still suffer from it, because like every time I play those roles, the whole back end of it, I'm like I'm a little off, you know, I'm fine, but like it's not perfect in my mind for me. And so I just really have to like musically, track-wise, character-wise, voice-wise, accent-wise, line-wise, like all of it, I just have to really have a strong hold on the whole picture of that track and that character before I move on. And that includes their harmony and their track of harmonies. So I just kind of include that in what I have to learn. And I have to review it when I go on. Like I was Diane in rehearsal yesterday, and I realized that there were about 3 songs that I went to go sing, and I was like, oh, does she sing alto here? Does she sing soprano here? I can't remember because she jumps around a lot. She's not one of those people that like Beverly is always singing soprano. Janice is always singing alto. Like it's very straightforward, but she's one of those tracks that kind of is cut up and she's all over the place. And then she sings second soprano sometimes. And there were a few times when I was like, oh, I don't remember what she sings, you know. So I think you just, luckily I have copious notes and copious little quick references that I can go to if I'm called to be on, to be like, okay, this is, you know, and that's what you do. Yeah.
I went to that first day of rehearsal and they read through the script, and then in the afternoon they started by doing the first transition into the first plane. And I watched them do it and I thought, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? Because they knew it so well and it just looked like nothing that they did all of this stuff. But I'm looking at that time I was only covering 3 people in DC. So I only watched, you know, those 3 people, and that in and of itself was really scary. And I thought, oh, I'm so lucky I'm not going to New York and covering 5 people. Little did I know. But in DC, you know, as with some of the other productions in La Jolla and Seattle, there's not enough time really to rehearse the understudies by themselves, or not full rehearsal process for the understudies. So you have to learn by watching. And in DC, I thought this is going to be just, I don't know how I'm ever going to learn this just by watching. But I think that was actually a tremendous gift, because to not have to think about the words or think about what's on the page with the music, or think about like I've written down this blocking, I almost started to see every track in almost it's like its own movie. And so I can refer back to that in my own mind. And I never thought I would learn that way. I'm much more like I write things out. If I'm memorizing lines, I usually write them out, and I write out other people's lines. But this was a totally different learning process. So I think what I learned the most on this was your process might change, and your process might be different for every show that you work on if the show mandates that it be different. And I also learned to trust that I'm more of a visual person than I thought I was. So that became really, really important to me. When I did come to the New York company, I had a little bit of an abbreviated learning time because they already knew that I sort of knew it, albeit from a year prior. But I learned the Diane track, relearned the Diane track in about 2 weeks, and then had to put in for that, and then started working on Beulah, and then I went on for Diane, and then 3 days later I went on for Beulah. So it was pretty crazy, the learning process for this. And while I was on for Diane and Beulah alternately in the next month, I was also learning, I think I learned Beverly first, and then Hannah, and then Bonnie. And things happened while I was learning while I was learning Bonnie. They said, oh, we need you to go on for Hannah in a week, or 3 days. Can you should we switch back to that? I said, yes, let's switch back to that. So it's a little bit like, I guess it's like life. You never know what's going to be thrown at you, so you have to just say, okay, now I'm going to put this one on the shelf, that's over there, and I'm going to concentrate on her, and you start to see that person's movie and soundtrack in your mind. And luckily for me, like, these people they're so good and talented, and they're so, their energy is always there, so you almost hear it, like the whole show, like a soundtrack. So that's how I learned musical theater when I was a kid. I learned Annie that way, right? Listening to Andrew McCardle sing over and over and over again, and so that's kind of how I learned the show. I joke that I could practically play Claude at this part because I can say all the lines. Now, I don't know where he goes, I don't know his blocking, and I don't pretend to be the actor that Joel Hatch is, but I could probably do his part from the lines just because I know everyone's lines from the show, because that's how my brain chose to pick everything down to learn it, you know?
Part of what's helped with me and the writing that I do is to try and compartmentalize who am I right now, who are they, how old are they, what do they look like, do they have an accent, where are they from, and then I like to work very physically, so sometimes I'll even change what I do with the posture to try and reflect who they are. A trick that I was told when I joined this cast was to make cue cards and to write little tips for myself of where I was going next and my lines. So if you ever bump into me on the on the TTC, our subway and our buses, you'll see me sitting there with these cards, just going over them and memorizing things. For me, it's about repetition and saying things out loud.
Because we were here from the beginning of the process, we learned them kind of all together, but we were told to concentrate kind of on our primaries. We were each given 2 primary covers and 2 secondary covers. So we had to basically kind of learn them all at once, but we're told to concentrate on your primaries first, you know, a little bit more, because what happens is we do, during our rehearsal process, we do put-ins, what's called a put-in rehearsal. So that's where we standbys get to, so the 6 of us get to do the show full out with the other 6 members of the performing company, and we get to do that for every character, not in front of the audience, but full costume, full lights, full band, as if you were doing the show for real. And so we had, you know, say a month of, or whatever it was, 5 or 6 weeks of the regular rehearsals for the performing cast, where we were in the room the whole time, learning everything, soaking up as much as we could. And then once the show started its previews in Winnipeg, then we started our rehearsals where we actually got to be up on our feet working it. And we did something like every, I can't remember what it was, every 3 weeks or something, what we would do a put-in. So we'd concentrate, you know, every single day, rehearse every single day until we all knew our track 1, and then we'd do a put-in, and then we'd go into track 2. So we did kind of learn all 4 of them, but concentrated on one at a time for each put-in. But there were times that some of us went on in front of audiences before we ever got to do our put-in. So that was really interesting. I think Kate got to do that, and I think Jeff possibly got to do that. Oh, Amir. So there's, you know, some really, you know, scary moments of that, but it's thrilling, and our cast, you know, really takes care of everyone on stage. You have to work as a unit in this show, and it all went off really well for everybody. Yeah.
What happens is the 6 of us standbys, well, depending, we've also had standbys join the cast, so in that case it's just the 1, but the women will get into wigs, full makeup, like the standbys themselves, wigs, full makeup, costume, the gentlemen will get into their costumes, and then the rest of the cast, whoever else is like the performing cast, will come, and they just need to wear their microphones. They don't need full costume. They'll need the pieces of costumes that get handed off throughout the show, so that we can track that and know, oh yes, I grabbed this sweater here, I passed this prop to this person here. So you have all the props, you have all the lighting, you have all the sound, you have the band. So the only thing really missing is some people aren't in full costume, and you do the show as a whole, as a rehearsal, no audience, so you don't get so much of this show, but the audience is the 13th member of the cast. So to not have that kind of feedback, you don't get that experience until the very first time you're actually on in front of an audience. But other than that, just knowing, oh my goodness, in this scene change, it's like almost completely black. Right, I have to clock that. I have to make sure I can see where I'm putting my chair before the lights go out, because they're about to go and to do it in the dark. So it's just clocking things like that, so that the next time when you do it and there is an audience there reacting and all that kind of thing, you feel a little more just prepared, secure, not like you're flying by the seat of your pants and just hoping that you won't fall off the stage. So yeah, it's very, very, very valuable for any of the standbys to get a chance to do that, because it is a whole different beast once you add the lights and the sound and the 6 other bodies on that stage that we don't get to rehearse with on a regular basis.
What do you remember about your very first performance as a standby show?
It was crazy because it was the day before opening night here in Toronto, and I actually hadn't even had a rehearsal with the whole cast doing the role of Bonnie yet. We had just kind of worked on it in the studio with the other 5 standbys and myself and our resident director. and stage management. So it was kind of like putting something from 2D into 3D without ever actually doing it physically. It's like from paper to full package, go. And it was such an adrenaline rush. Dana, our resident director, was amazing, came in early and we talked through the whole role, and then it was just like, okay, go. And I'm not saying it was a perfect performance by any means, but when it was over at the end of the show, we say, welcome to the rock and jump, and the lights go out, and I screamed, because it was just like, oh my gosh, I've done this, oh my gosh, it happened. And Corey O'Brien grabbed me by like the collar of my shirt and was like, Kate, you still need to bow, come here. Stop screaming. But the audience was screaming too, so I don't think they heard me. But it was the biggest adrenaline rush, and it was just like, oh my gosh, I just had one of my life dreams come true.
Tell me about Petrina's reaction when you performed for the first time.
So Petrina's actually a really good friend of my dad. I hadn't actually met Petrina ever when I went on for that performance I was telling you about earlier. And so of course when I got the call, I called my dad. Be like, Dad, I'm going to be on today in Petrina's role. And so Dad got in contact with Petrina and let her know that I was going on. And like immediately Petrina had added me as a friend to Facebook and was messaging me. And she just said, girl, I'm going to be thinking about you, because she was doing a matinee. It was a matinee. Yeah, it was a matinee. And she said, I'm doing the show today, and they're in the same time zone. So she's like, I'm going to be willing you through every single transition. I'll be thinking of you with every chair move, with every song, I'll be thinking about you. And she said, I'm really sorry about that first plane transition. That's totally my fault. I volunteered to do too much. And it is a crazy transition in the Bonnie track. But she was so excited for me too. And just like, I could feel that she was sending me those vibes the whole performance. And of course she checked in right after the show came down. Just, how did it go? You know, so it was pretty cool to have two Newfoundlanders playing the same role in different countries, but in the same show on one day. That's pretty cosmic.
My very first track was Beulah, which was my third track.
Wow.
So funny enough, one of my secondary tracks, but they put me on as Beulah, and I don't know if I remember anything. I think it's such a blur. I think for each character that you go on for, it's so scary and so thrilling that the whole event kind of just seems like a blur. I don't know, blur. I don't know that I remember a lot about the Beulah track when I went on for Beulah the first time. The ones that stick out to me are when I went on for Beverly and when I went on for Janice. Beverly, because I do feel so attached to the role in terms of it just feels so right for me. So that was an extra thrilling night for me. It just felt like I was at home, and it felt really good and secure and confident. So I loved that night, and I remember crying. Like I remember coming off stage and Dana, our resident director, throwing her arms around me, and I was crying because it was just this beautiful experience of, all of these years of kind of waiting to be able to get out there and do that role was a real blessing, and that felt great. And then I definitely remember the Janice time because I've only been on for it once. It's kind of that track that everybody joked about, oh, it's never going to happen because it's, my last one. I'm the second cover for it. I'm not really supposed to go on for it, unless there's like a major emergency. And of course that's what happened. And I got thrown on and hadn't done it. Like we hadn't done it in so long. It had been like 6 months or something since my put-in. And we do have our rehearsals that we do every week or every 2 weeks as standbys. But it still had been, our rehearsals are just the standbys. They're not all 12 characters on stage. So it's quite different from when you actually get to go on. So getting thrown into doing the Janice track was a complete whirlwind, and I was shaking the whole time and really nervous, but it went off really well. It felt, I felt almost hysterical because it was so much fun to be that nervous and to be that, like everybody was joking around about, saying like this was never supposed to happen. So it was really fun. But the one thing that I always say to everybody is that after the first time I was ever on for any of the tracks, the next day when you wake up in the morning, it feels like you've been hit by a Mack truck because your adrenaline is so high the night before, like during the show, that when you crash, like you sleep so hard and then you wake up the next day going, oh, like it feels like you ran a marathon the night before. So that's maybe one of the more interesting, difficult parts of being a standby is that you don't get to get it in your bones like the performing cast who they're just used to it. They get to do it 8 times a week, so they get rid of that adrenaline rush. Whereas for us, almost every time we go on, there's still quite a bit of an adrenaline rush because we don't get to do it 8 times a week like you normally do in a normal situation when you're just playing the role. So it's always what that does to your body is interesting.
We're still quite early days, so it's still very intense, especially for the standbys, because we're still trying to learn all of our tracks. So I've done, of my 5, I've now done 3 of them in terms of having had a dress rehearsal and a put-in. So I've got another 2 to do, and it takes us about a month to do each character. And then because we had some standbys join late, we'll have another couple of months after that. So at the moment we have a regular show schedule, so Monday to Saturday nights we have shows, and we have Wednesday matinees and Saturday matinees, and then we're in all day Tuesday, all day Thursday rehearsing, and we also, if we're not on, we're often rehearsing while the show's going on. So today we just had a matinee, but the rest of us were upstairs having a music call with our assistant musical director to go over, because each character has their own harmonies, each character, so it's completely different. Every single track has its own very specific journey through the show.
What was your favorite track as a standby?
So I covered 4 tracks. I covered the mayor. I covered the mayor, Claude's track, Claude and others. I covered Oz, the policeman, and others. I covered both Kevins. And I'm now playing Kevin T. So I kind of think like that's my favorite track because I think that's the track that I probably would have got if I was to get one, you know what I mean? But I had a lot of fun going on I went out for Oz the next most. And I had a lot of fun doing him, but his part was really busy. Like I think he plays 7 different characters, and it's just like really busy, but kind of quirky. Like all the characters are pretty silly or whatever. So I enjoyed that. And then I only went on for the mayor, I think like 3 or 4 times, but after the first time, I really started enjoying that. It's just I'm so physically different than the 2 other guys that play the mayor in this company. Like they're twice my size. But I just had to think, well, I'm kind of look like a Justin Trudeau type or whatever. I'm kind of like this just sort of normal-looking, nice guy, and I'll just be me, and we'll see how that goes. I only did Kevin J. I think I did 2 performances, but they were on the same day, and I think both of them I was just a nervous wreck the whole time, so I didn't enjoy them. Didn't enjoy them at all.
So what characters do you cover? Oz, Kevin T, and
Kevin J, Bob, and Claude, the mayor. Which
Wow.
actually, I was like, oh, I've got to cover the mayor. Sorry, I say mayor in my Belfast accent, but it's mayor. But I have to cover Claude. But I was kind of a little bit, I'm not going to be very good at that, it's not going to work. And then Tara, our amazing associate, she just went, well, you play him as you. You don't try and play older. Clive's a lot older, and you don't play Clive's age, you play your age, you play you. This is your mayor. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, I'm not going to go on it. So my mayor is just young, he's never done this before. This is happening, and he's like, all right, well, this is happening, so we have to deal with it. And actually, it's amazing because you can take these characters who are real people and put your own spin on it. And I think that's great, really good, really fun. Kevin J is the one I think I would most like to get on for because I love his journey. And as well with Ali as well. I think it's just, he gets such lovely moments. That they all do, but I just really would love to just try and do that once.
what do you wish you knew when you were just starting out?
Oh, I wish I knew when I was just starting out just to be myself so much more. Like, and I think it's an impossible thing. People actually will tell you that, but we as actors, we're always, we're always trying to be someone else, right? We're trying to land a part where we are someone else. And I think learning the distinction between this is another person that you are trying to be, but you have to bring all of yourself to that part is something that it's really hard to understand, especially when you're younger. You think, oh, I have to make them think that I am this part. Just for instance, that I'm doing Beulah tonight, and Astrid is phenomenal, and there's just something about her that is just so grounded and Earth Mother, and it's just sort of in her being, like when she walks around as a person. Now that's my perception as an audience member. I just look at her and I think, oh, she just takes care of everyone. And I don't think of myself that way. Although I have, a little bit of that characteristic, but I don't think of myself like I just exude that. And so the younger self in me would be like, oh, but how are you going to make them think that you are this Earth Mother? And it's like, well, now I just bring whatever part of me that is to the part, and I say the lines, and I trust that I have something to offer what that soul is. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been offered the part. And that's once you get the part. When you're auditioning, it's even worse because you have no idea if they think you are right for it, so you muscle that. You're like, how do I dress? And how do I, you muscle all of these things that you're trying to give them what you think they want. And the God's honest truth is there's no way that you can change into what they want. You are either what they want or you are not. All you can do is do all of your prep work ahead of time, learn your lines as much as you can so that you have the freedom to really be there in the moment and act, and then it's out of your hands. That's really all you can do. And when you're young, you do not trust that at all.
How do you manage to find balance between your family and career? I mean, your son is still small, right?
Yes, my son he's 3 1/4 right now, and it's probably the best thing about being a standby is having a young child and being a standby. You have times where you are not physically working when you're off stage. You might be looking at your lines, or you might be going over your notes, or you might be watching the show, but you're not always physically out there doing the 8 shows a week. When I am physically doing the 8 shows a week, there's a lot less balance. That's just how it has to be. You have to be at the theater more. You have to practice a bit more self-care, taking Epsom salt baths, doing more stretching, taking more time just to rest and rejuvenate. So the best possible job I could have right now. Like, I think sometimes people are like, oh, well, don't you just feel bad that you're not on stage all the time? And I probably, my younger self would have said, of course I would feel bad that I'm not. I always want to be out there. But I love watching them, and I love getting to sit sometimes and just be in my dressing room working on stuff quietly, not using my body, because I've been running around after a 3-year-old all day. He doesn't take any breaks. So to get to actually sit down and just be in the dressing room looking at stuff or listening to stuff is an awesome gift. I mean, that's how I find the balance. If I had to be on stage, 8 shows a week, it's different. I just did a 2-month stint for one of the parts because somebody was out, and it was really, really difficult. Like, I have a whole different respect for how difficult, even a show that doesn't look like there's a lot of physical dancing or anything, it's really tough on these people's bodies because you're giving so much physical energy, even if you're not doing pirouettes and big kicks and stuff. But it's a lot of physical and emotional energy to give. So I find the balance by being a standby and getting to sit up in my dressing room sometimes, or sit out in the audience, and then be on stage enough to still have all of that spark and all of that love and acceptance from the crew around me. It's so special how they constructed it. I mean, first of all, when I first read the script for this, before they ever went to La Jolla and stuff, it was a totally different script, and it read like a movie because it cuts from scene to scene, and most musicals don't do that. So the structure is so different, and you kind of couldn't see how I was like, how are they going to do this? It's really interesting, but I couldn't see how they were going to do it. And they put this together in such a way that they wove everything so perfectly and were so not precious about things with each other. They worked so well together. Getting to be in DC, that was really the Broadway rehearsal process, was while they were in DC, because that's the longest they had when they knew they were going to Broadway, to get everything sort of the most honed in. And then they did make a few changes after that in Toronto before they came to Broadway, and then a couple when they were here. But most of the big changes happened between Seattle and DC and were implemented there. So I got to watch that process and watch these guys all work together and really work together. No one was ever like, well, I don't know, I think we need to keep that line, or we need to keep that word, or I want to keep my line, or nobody was like that. Everybody was sort of in it for the whole ensemble feel, and telling the story is the most important thing, and everyone really bought onto that. So that was really, really inspiring to me to see that. And I think because they were so integral, working together so closely, that it inspires people to feel that way. Plus, our director is brilliant. He never lets you applaud the whole time. So you're like holding in all of your feelings till the very end, and then you're like, I have to jump up because I've been feeling things for an hour, an hour and a half, or an hour and 45 minutes, and no one's let me feel it, or, you can barely get to express it. So it sort of makes people jump up. But I mean, thank goodness, if they ever stop jumping, we're definitely doing something wrong, because what they wrote, David and Irene wrote, and what Chris and Kelly and everybody involved has put together is a story that should make you want to jump to your feet, that we can all be this kind of human being to each other, and let them keep jumping.
The most common misconception of being a standby is that the standbys aren't as good as the performing company, that they're not as talented, or that they don't play the roles as well as the performing company.
You'd think when you see that little slip of paper in your program, you're like, oh, the understudy's on it. It really doesn't mean you're going to have a lesser than performance because of that. It just means you're going to have a different performance. You're going to have a performance that's a little bit different than the people who cast the show may have wanted you to experience it, whether that's aesthetically or the sound of the show or whatnot, but it doesn't mean it's a less talented individual stepping into that role. It's just somebody different. You're still going to get a great show, because everybody who, the audition process is so, it's so challenging to go through, and then to actually book the show, that there's egregious amounts of talent with anybody who's in that playbill.
Being a standby is a very different world. As I said, my career has been very specific in itself. I've been in the business, like I said, for over 20 years, and I've only ever played lead roles before. So coming into a standby situation, I feel has been not only challenging technically and with the skills that you need to be a standby, which I don't even think any of us knew we had. It's not something you can do until you're just thrown in and can do it. So that's been very interesting. But I also think, and I talk about this with close friends and family a lot, is that being a standby is I say it's a lesson in patience and humility, and they're very good lessons, especially in our industry, because nothing is ever about you as a standby, and if you come from a place where you're very used to, being the star of the show, or being kind of maybe someone who is in a different place in terms of what's the word I'm looking for, let's say just with reviews or with press or things, which is all of a very important part of our industry. When you're a standby, you're not necessarily part of that, and I think that other than the technical challenges of being a standby, that's actually been possibly one of the most challenging parts, is learning how, just as a human, to go, what does that mean, and does it mean anything, and you know, how do I as a person want to deal with that? Do I want to take that to heart and make it mean something, or can I learn from this and step back and go, actually this is just all, you know, like it all brings it down really essentially to what's important, which is the work and the show, instead of getting to a place of like ego driven, you know, things, which I think has been really interesting. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, to be honest, being a standby, and I don't know that I would change that. I think I'm learning a lot about myself through it, and yeah, even though that's been a difficult part of it, I think it's really valuable. I think it's maybe something that maybe every actor should experience at some point in their life, so that they understand, you know, that every single person who's part of a company is so important, and there's nothing that is more important, like no one that is more important than the other. We're all just part of this really important you know, group that makes the whole thing function the way that it is. And I think that that's been a very valuable lesson for me as an actor and as a human.
Swings are some of the most talented people on Broadway, hands down. And I also think that every single person that works in this business should have to be a swing or an understudy at some time. Because I think that if that happened, people would have a lot more respect for what we do. There would be a lot more just sort of care and space around the choices that are made and how we're treated, and how, you know, this company is exceptional and extraordinary, and one of the best situations that I've ever worked in. But there's definitely situations where as an understudy you aren't always treated as well or as respected as the people that are in the show. And in my mind, we are some of the most important people in the building. We are the ones who actually should be cared for a lot, because we save the show. We save everybody's ass all the time, right? Like, and so it's important for us to be taken care of, and for us to feel respected, and for us to be healthy, and for us to get days off, and for us to get all of the things that everyone else does, you know? And so there's a little bit of a fight for that sometimes in this job, and sometimes it can be a little hard. You know, like, I'm a person who loves to work. I love to work. I love to be on stage, and it's hard for me to sit around. Like, I don't want to sit around. I want to work. And so it can be really trying and hard on your ego, on your emotions, on your sort of passion for what you do, because you don't get to do it all the time. And then when you do it, a lot of times it's kind of thankless. In this particular company, it's not thankless at all. And this company appreciates us more than I've ever been appreciated. These producers appreciate us more than any producers have ever appreciated us. So this has been a wonderful experience as a cover. But there have been experiences in my career where, like, you go on and you save the show under insane circumstances, and it's like you don't even get a thank you. You don't even get a pat on the back, good job. And it's like you kicked ass and saved the entire show.
I know that on stage, left and right, you have your own like rituals.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about it, please.
Yeah. So that's another way of keeping present with everybody. Sometimes in long-running shows it's tricky because you know, you come up here to your dressing room, and then over there's 3 people in another room and 3 people in another room, and sometimes in certain shows you could like go through the entire show and never lay eyes on a particular person in the show because they're always on in a different scene than you or whatever, and you could like literally be working with them and never see them, which is pretty weird. And then I guess in another circumstance, you could have one scene with them that's really important, but if you don't see them until that scene, it can sometimes be a little bit weird because like I don't know what your energy like today because I haven't seen you yet, you know. So I think with this show, because we're all on stage almost the whole time, I think it's kind of a last chance to just kind of lock in with everybody. I think it came out of at first because the show was very nerve-wracking for the first several performances, because it is so technical and so fast, and you're out there the whole time. There's no break, and that it was almost like a needed thing where everyone would tell each other, I've got your back. If anything goes a little bit weird or whatever, I'm going to be there for you and I'll help you get through it. And that helped calm everybody down. So I think both sides started doing that individually, and then we just kept doing it. And now it's just like a fun way of kind of just, some days we acknowledge a milestone, right? Or some days we celebrate someone's birthday, or if there's someone has family member in the audience, we'll say, oh, it's for them today, it's for them. And I don't know, it just kind of keeps everybody on the same page a little bit. I mean, we don't know what they're doing over there on stage right, but on stage left, that's what we do. And when the standby comes in, it's always fun because we invite them in the circle, and we invite the crew into the circle as well. And because we can't do it without them, it just kind of keeps the spirits high, you know?
Do you touch the flags?
Sometimes. It's not a, like I think when I go to the flags, it's usually because I didn't feel like I really connected or something in the previous show. And it helps ground me, helps remind me of who they are and what they did, you know? But I love that they're there because you can see them even from on stage when you're facing the wing, you can see them, and I think it's great. But yeah, so I don't touch it every show. I think some do. Some actors do every show. I would do probably 2 or 3 a week, probably.
All starts on stage right, and Kevin T starts on stage left, so I've had both rituals. They're both very different.
So you do it here as well?
Yeah. We have... Stage left is a lot more fun. Stage right is a lot more... We're getting focused, you know, so... But see, the thing is, what I love about theatre is always that it should be cheeky, we should be playing, we shouldn't... I totally am all for let's take this seriously, let's do this job, but we should never lose sight of the fact that we're having a play. We're playing these people, we are getting to play around for a living, and it is fun. There has to be that element of fun, because I think if you lose that element of fun, I think you become so rigid and so... And I've struggled with nerves, like nervous energy and stuff. But if I try and remember, and I think that that's what's lovely about the show, when we start the show, the ritual at the start just focuses you, brings you into that sense of community, and brings you into that sense of like, we're here as a team and we're going to tell this amazing story. So yeah, I think that's what I love, I think, about the start of the show. It really does go, we're going to do this, you know. It's a lot of holding hands, breathing, and just connecting, you know. Fundamentally it's that. It's like, let's get together and tell the story. Because when we're, you know, like I think that when you're an actor and you're living in London, you're like, oh, I've got to run to Pret a Manger, oh, I've got to go there, I've got to go and get something from the post office, and you run around, and then you come into work and you go, oh, I've got to act. And I think what's lovely is you just go, let's do it, and take a breath from the big city, you know.
What do you like the most about being on this show?
Oh, I mean, the people are just so awesome, and the people on stage are awesome. Our crew is awesome. Our producers are awesome. The people that we play are amazing, and you know, we always say that the audience is the 13th cast member, and that's really true. I mean, if you go out to the stage door and there are people from Newfoundland there, and they tell you stories on themselves, or even they're just like, oh, I'm from here, and you know, oh, it's so great, and you guys did such a great job, and you feel proud that you've told their story and that they feel something from it. And I met someone the other night who was she was on Beverly Bass's crew on the flight that landed in Gander. Yeah.
Wow.
And she was so emotional and so moved about it. And I said, well, have you talked to Beverly? And she's like, no, I haven't talked to her in a long time since she retired. And I said, you should reach out to her. Like, you know, she'd love to hear from you. You know, you get to feel all of these different people's, you know, souls come through about how they react to this story and how it touches them. And for me, I was down at the World Trade Center on the day of 9/11. I actually was working as an executive assistant at the time, and I worked in 3 World Financial Center, so I had just walked through Tower 1 about 30 minutes before the first plane hit. And so my experience with that day, you know, is very, very specific, as is everyone's, but it was very difficult for me to kind of recognize my own emotions about that day, that they were valid, because I also saw so many terrible things, but I thought, you don't have a right to feel this way, because I didn't lose anyone personally, and I wasn't hurt, and I wasn't, you know, there were so many things that I was sort of judging myself about my reactions to that day. And this whole story has been incredibly healing, both for me and for almost everyone who comes to see it, because it gives you something else to think about for that day. And also gives you a huge realization that everyone felt something tremendous from that happening, even if it was different. And even if we didn't lose people, we all lost something that day that was collective. And if we acknowledge each other's stories instead of, you know, sort of saying, well, I don't have any right to feel that way, or you don't have a right to feel that way because you weren't as close to it as I was, or you don't have a right to feel like that because you didn't lose somebody, and sort of how I judged myself at the time, and how I sort of judged others because I didn't have the bandwidth to take in anybody else's feelings about it, because I hadn't dealt with my own. This has, you know, really, really healed that. And I feel like now if I'm out on the line and I see somebody who's having a really emotional reaction to it, I can take that and I can also share my story with them sometimes. So, you know, it's just been incredible to connect with people in that way. You know, it starts on stage, but it goes all the way out to the line outstage and beyond that. You know, how we treat each other on a daily basis, how many times we, you know, don't get really annoyed by the person who's walking too slow in front of us, or who's, you know, walking their phone like this or something like that, because you just have to remind yourself, like, what's the bigger picture, and what are we trying to say here? So the people have been extraordinarily life-changing for me in so many ways.
What was it like to meet the real people?
Oh my gosh, the real people are so fun. I met them later than other people, obviously. When I came onto the show here, Beulah and Hannah, Beulah Cooper and Hannah O'Rourke were here together at the same time. So I met them first, and Astrid introduced me. She said, "Oh, Beulah, this is Happy." She said, one of our new covers. Before she could even get it out of her mouth, Beulah pulls me in for a big hug, and she goes, "Oh my God, you gotta come together. You know, you stay at my place, I'm gonna screech you in," and all this. I mean, I was just like, she's just like she is in the show. Absolutely just like she was in the show. And then Hannah was so like warm, but like quiet. She was like the quiet version of Beulah, and Beulah's like the outgoing. But Hannah reminded me of my grandma, because my grandmother is actually, was an devout Irish Catholic lady. Her parents came over from Ireland, so she didn't come from Ireland directly, but her parents came from Ireland, and so she reminded me of that spirit, and the two of them, they almost look related. So that was the most interesting thing to me, is that, you know, they formed this sort of sister relationship, and now they almost look like they could be related. And then I very, very specially got to go out to do a press event in Milwaukee with Nick and Diane. So I got to go out there and introduce the fact that Come From Away was going to be added to their season in Milwaukee. So I first met them, we met them at lunch, myself and Tony Lepage, who's one of the other covers, went out to do this event. And so we said, you know, they had gotten there earlier, we arrived that day, and we said, what did you all do this morning? And she said, well, we went down by the river, we were walking down, and we were just thinking, you know, we just saw some things that said that, you know, the Germans landed here and they did this, and so it was exactly like she is in the show. It was exactly, and he was taking pictures the whole time of everything, documenting everything, and I thought, wow, this is really just exactly like the show. Like, they have gotten everything so spot on. And then we did the event at night, and afterwards we all went out to dinner, and they were so fun. They just were so open to new experiences, probably because of what happened to them, that, you know, if they had been like, oh, hi, yes, of course you can sit here, and then turned away and never spoke to each other, look what they would have missed out on. So they sort of keep that spirit. I mean, they went out, they wanted to go bar hopping with us because we were going to go to this cool bar that I had been to when I've been through Milwaukee on tour. And so they were game. They were like, sure, we'll go out with you. And then that bar was closed, so we went somewhere else. And they just were, you know, open and so fun and ready for anything that life was going to give them. And I thought that's what actually helped me to find my Diane the most, was I thought, this lady, I'd always thought she must be pretty open if she would open herself up to sort of meeting this person in such a weird circumstance. And then once I met her, I thought, yes, that's exactly it. And so then I sort of used that to really find the depth in the characters. Like, well, if you really opened yourself up to experiences the way you witnessed this lady open herself up, what would that be like? And so that's how I feel like I found my version of Diane.
Oh God, amazing. Just, they're so lovely and so welcoming. And she's not from Gander, but Beverly Bass, who was the pilot, because a lot of them came to our Dublin opening, and they're coming to the London opening as well. And I just remember I actually went to school in America when I was little, and there was an area in the library that you weren't allowed to go into until you were in 4th grade. I don't know why, it was arbitrary. I was like, why would you stop kids from getting books that they want to read? But it was the biography section, and I really wanted to read. There was a whole raft of female biographies. There was like Florence Nightingale, and the one I really wanted to read was Amelia Earhart, who, famous pilot, as you know. And I had to fight to be allowed to go a year early into this section to check this book out. And it was just such an inspiring story, and for me, Beverly Bass is like a continuation of that story of all the things that Amelia Earhart fought for back then. And now look, we're living in a world where she was the first female American pilot for American Airlines, had a completely female crew, and, you know, worked right through and was obviously caught up in that crazy day. And she's a very inspiring woman.
One of the things our creative team told us when we were learning the show was to survive in Newfoundland. You know, when you immigrate there, let's say it's there's snow 6 months of the year, 8 months of the year. Sometimes it's really bad weather. You're not gonna necessarily be able to make it on your own. So you need your neighbors to help you survive, literally. And so taking care of one another in a circumstance like 9/11 is just second nature for them, right? Whereas, you know, if that had happened here in Toronto, it wouldn't be second nature. It wouldn't happen. People wouldn't do that. People would like lock their doors and pull down their blinds because they'd be just afraid, which is crazy, you know? Maybe in small towns, there might be a few, but I'm not saying like the whole community the whole city of Toronto wouldn't get behind it like that, which is really kind of neat, you know? And I think the show does a really nice job of writing about that, like sort of opening up the door or the window to for an audience. Because let's face it, I mean, we know Newfoundland. They talk a little different. It's out on the coast, so there's probably a lot of fishing and stuff. But other than that, like, what do we know about them? Nothing. But the show does a nice job of like dropping in references about food, you know, cod au gratin and, you know, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I had never had that before. I went out there, and same thing with the music, right? Like the Ugly Stick, right? Like that, they don't talk about it. They mention it, and the guy who's playing it. So you assume, you know, oh, I guess that must be a traditional part of their culture, and of course it is. And the drum, the Boron drum, and the fiddle music and all that. Like, it's really cool the way they were able to weave that throughout the show, you know? No Broadway musical sounds like this.